Today's lesson is on enkindlement, on that fire of the love of God that burns within our hearts. You know, God has created everyone in humanity, you, me, every person who has ever lived, is living now, and will ever live in the future. God has created us and put in each one of our hearts that spark of the love of God that enkindles our soul and our hearts. And how do we feed that flame of the love of God? How do we make it burn? We do it by praying every day, by studying the Word of God and finding out how God wants us to live and then trying to live that way, and by serving others, which is also a way that we serve God. And as the flame of the love of God grows in our hearts, then other people can appreciate that light and it can encourage them to help feed the flame of the love of God in their hearts as well. And we have, to help us understand this a little bit better, we have this quotation from Baha'u'llah: "Let the flame of the love of God burn brightly within your radiant hearts." And then we're told, "Feed it with the oil of divine guidance and protect it within the shelter of your constancy." So first of all, let's look at it. It says we're supposed to feed that flame with some oil. What does that mean? We're going to look at this kerosene lantern. So how would we feed, how is this lantern oil fed?
Well, this lamp has a little reservoir, and you put a funnel there, and you pour in some oil from this tank. And that's what feeds the flame in the lamp.
So the oil in the lamp is the kerosene. The oil for our hearts is divine guidance. And divine guidance is what God tells us in the Word of God, in the holy books, about how He wants us to live and how He wants us to serve others. So that's the oil that feeds our hearts. So then it says we're supposed to protect the flame of the love of God within the shelter of your constancy. Well, how is this flame protected?
Well, this lamp has the flame inside, which you can adjust up and down, and it's protected by this glass globe and the metal shielding. So if the wind blows, it does not get blown out, but it's protected by the glass, yet the light can come out.
So for us, the flame of the love of God in our hearts, it's protected within the shelter of our constancy. So constancy, a word story for constancy is, Pierre was a good friend to everyone. He was reliable in what he said he was going to do, and he was kind and courteous to everyone. People admired Pierre for his constancy. So we have a story today about someone whose heart was enkindled with the love of God, and his name was Thomas Breakwell, and he was a man who lived over 100 years ago. And in fact, he was born in the 1800s. And he was born in England, but when I'm telling you the story, the time of the story, he was a young man and he was living in the southern United States. He had a job as a supervisor in a cotton mill in the southern part of the United States. And he would spend every summer in Europe for his vacation. Now, in the summer of 1901, Breakwell, they didn't call him Thomas, they called him Breakwell. Breakwell was on a steamship going from the United States over to Europe. And when he was on the ship, he met a woman, and they started talking, and they had some wonderful conversations about spiritual topics, which Breakwell was very interested in. They talked about God and about what God wanted us to do and the nature of our soul. And so they, all the way across the Atlantic, they talked about that. Then when they got to Europe, they were both going to Paris. And when they got to Paris, the woman said, I have a friend who also loves to talk about spiritual topics. I think you'd like to meet her. And so she took Breakwell to this woman's apartment, and she warmly welcomed them, and they started talking about spiritual subjects. And it was so interesting to Breakwell that he asked at the end of that evening if he could come back again so they could continue talking. And the young woman said, yes, why don't you come back tomorrow morning? So Breakwell left, and the next morning when he arrived, his eyes were shining brightly, and he was looking at the woman very intently. And she asked him to sit down. So he sat down, and he told her about a strange thing that had happened the night before. He said when he left the woman's apartment, he went walking through the avenue, and it was a very still night. Not a leaf was stirring, and the air was heavy and humid. It was summer, remember. And then all of a sudden there was a great wind gust that blew up through the streets. And in that wind, he heard a very sweet but powerful voice that told him about a new message from God. And so when the woman heard Breakwell's story, she said, yes, I know about a new message from God. And she started telling him everything she knew about the Baha'i faith, about its history, about its teachings, and about the son of the founder of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, the son, whose name was Abdu'l-Baha, who was still living in the Holy Land. Oh, Breakwell's heart was so full of love, and that flame of the love of God had been kindled in his heart, and he really wanted to meet Abdu'l-Baha. It so happened that there in Paris there was a young man who was planning to travel to the Holy Land to meet Abdu'l-Baha, and he said he would be very happy if Breakwell wanted to join him. So they wrote to Abdu'l-Baha and got permission for Breakwell to visit Abdu'l-Baha. So they went to the Holy Land, and when they got there, they were taken to the home of Abdu'l-Baha and into a room where there were several other people there. And they sat down, and Breakwell looked around, and he saw these other people, but he was assuming that Abdu'l-Baha was there, but none of these people his heart felt drawn to, and he thought, oh my gosh, I'm not able to recognize Abdu'l-Baha. And he was thinking maybe he was kind of sad. And then all of a sudden the door to the room opened, and this bright light, it seemed like this bright light shone through the door, and there was Abdu'l-Baha. Oh my gosh. Breakwell was so joyful to meet Abdu'l-Baha and to have his heart filled again with that love of God. Breakwell spent 2 glorious days with Abdu'l-Baha. And that flame of the love of God was burning brighter and brighter as he spent time and learned more about this message from God for today. But there was something that was troubling Breakwell. And he finally said to Abdu'l-Baha, I have this job in a cotton mill in the southern United States. And in the cotton mill, some of our workers are children. And I'm thinking maybe that's not such a good idea. What should I do? And Abdu'l-Baha advised Breakwell that yes, he should resign from that job. It was not right to make children do that kind of hard work. And without even a regret or anything, immediately Breakwell said yes, and he sent in his resignation from his job, and he was still joyful because he knew that was the right thing to do. Now, Breakwell returned to Paris, and even though he had no longer any job, he didn't have a income anymore, and also something else is he also suffered greatly from illness. But he was still joyful because he was doing the will of God. He was feeding his soul with the divine guidance. And it wasn't too long after that the illness overtook Breakwell, and he died. When Abdu'l-Baha heard about Breakwell's death, he wrote a tablet, which is a kind of a letter, in Breakwell's honor. And this is part of what he said about Thomas Breakwell. He said, "O Breakwell, O my dear one, thou hast lit a flame within the lamp of the company on high. Thou hast set foot in the Abha paradise. Thou hast found a shelter in the shadow of the blessed tree. Thou hast attained his meeting in the haven of heaven." So like Breakwell, we can feed the flame of the love of God within our hearts with that oil of divine guidance and be enkindled. So let's just revisit our quotation. Let the flame of the love of God burn brightly within your radiant hearts. Feed it with the oil of divine guidance and protect it within the shelter of your constancy. Enkindlement.